Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. Strangle your demons and let's go.
Y'all need Jesus!
Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. Newsflash. Boy, I tell you, President Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander Eisenhower, Admiral Nimitz, and we know that later on, one of our most famed Nimitz-class carriers is, in fact, CVN number 69, the USS Eisenhower, the epitome of American outreach militarily, the epitome of American might. And since October 7th, between Hamas and Israel, the Eisenhower Carrier Strike Force has been patrolling the Red Sea, primarily to dissuade the Houthis, keep shipping lanes open. After all, as that area of the world goes and the ability to move on the water goes, so goes the world. So we've been there. And no one would challenge that type of might, right? But I tell you what, our good old Wahhabist brothers in Saudi Arabia that put, 16 to 17 of those hijackers on those planes that crashed into American targets, 2 at the World Trade Center, 1 that was taken down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and of course the Pentagon. Still wondering about that one, though. I mean, if you've never landed or taken off in a commercial jet airplane, how in the world could you cruise through Washington, D.C., cross the Potomac, get low enough to hit the bottom of the Pentagon without crashing beforehand? That took extraordinary skill, of which that pilot would never have possessed it. Story for another day. But we know those good old Wahhabists were in a pickle because the Houthis were after them, man. The Houthis didn't like them over there in Yemen. That's why Barack had to, use all those Predator drone strikes and kill thousands of Yemenis and collateral damage civilians, unlike what Israel's doing with Hamas, because we needed to help our friends, the Saudis. Are they still our friends? They just put in a petition to join BRICS, which means they're going to be allied with Russia, China, India, South Africa, et al. All the countries we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. That's really interesting. My enemy's enemy is my friend. Will he be there again? Evidently not. But by providing tons of infrastructure money to the Saudis, who are already rich enough, but they don't have the military hardware, we said, crush those damn Yemenis. There you go, House of Fad. Crush them. So they destroyed the Yemenis. But I tell you what, the Houthis are still wrangling their sabers. They're wrangling their sabers because of what happened. Now we've got a hot war between Hamas. The Houthis are sympathetic to Hamas. Of course, they have been an Iranian-backed militia for a long, long time. And what's going on? Israel's also at war with Iran. So because they have been insulted and they have their feelings hurt, and that puts them right at proximity to the sea lanes. That's where their country is. They're like, buddy, we're going to take care of business. But now what these guys have are Iranian drones. And where do those drones come from? China. So they have them in proliferation. And we know that these drones are now used to deliver ordnance. They have missiles. They have crazy capabilities. And did you know, apparently last Friday, but we have basically had a news blackout on it. We're not hearing about it. What we are hearing about is that it is a ruse, that the good old Ike was never in any type of jeopardy, has not been hit. Nothing has happened to the USS Eisenhower. Now look at all these countries that I named, and weapons here, war there, this one and that one. Eisenhower, when he left, knew despite being who he was, what he had accomplished, whom all he had commanded. When he left as president, he knew that there was now a shadow state, a deep state, that had more juice than even he did. And that's why in his last broadcast, leaving the Oval Office, he said, beware the military-industrial complex. That was his warning to us that we had completely lost control. So by the 50s, we had no more control despite winning World War II. So he would be turning over in his grave right now that the great warship named after him was in some type of jeopardy. And I would think that Admiral Nimitz, our naval hero from World War II, since it is a Nimitz class, and may I add, nuclear-powered carrier, you don't think there's some OPSEC involved here, man? Whatever is going on, there is some operational security concerns. And here's how I know that something has happened. Do I think it's in jeopardy of being sunk? Do I think it is something irreparable? Do I think that the crew is in jeopardy? No. But I'm also wondering what countermeasures were employed by us. What did we do to strike back? Because we are the tip of the spear on the oceans with a carrier of that nature in the planes that sit topside. Here's how I know that they're lying to us. I just received a report from a trusted source that says supposedly regular communications between family in the U.S. with their shipboard relatives are currently prohibited and have been during these past days. If nothing had happened and the Eisenhower strike force was just going about their business unabated, why would you shut down comms on board? Why could the sailors no longer communicate back home or with their families? We have the technology whereby everything's encrypted. No one can belie that or get in and hear what is being said. I think that is very odd. Okay, how about this one? Why don't we just take a look at Captain Chris Chowda is his nickname. Chris Chowda Hill, obviously a very important man to captain that vessel. Well, Chris Hill, the commanding officer of the Eisenhower, has been posting photographs, in fact, just yesterday, to social media showing him visiting the ship's bakery while the ship is supposedly critically damaged or sunk. And he has now made a comment on X. I did not know that naval captains were allowed on X. I didn't know that naval captains while out at sea posted on social media. And this great captain and a former Top Gun instructor has said jokingly, oh yeah, everything's cool. I think we were sunk only twice this year. Well, what is the necessity for posting to social media, Captain? Loose lips sink ships. That belies OPSEC in and of itself. When has that ever been done before? And I bet should we edit all social media over the tenure of you being in command of the Eisenhower, you have not been making little trips to the bakery, and you probably have not been making jovial posts. So why are we working so hard to create a picture and or illusion? Why is the MSM or the mainstream media parroting left and right that the Eisenhower is fine and shows all these photographs of it supposedly sitting in port? It's doing just great, nothing to look at here. All these little snippets tell me that there is something to look at. Something has occurred. And I'm going to tell you this. Here is the big litmus test. And all my naval veterans that listen, and even my naval veterans that are familiar with flight deck operations and carriers, and who know that part of the world, if they are currently in the Red Sea, the typical way that they make passage to come home back, right? That would be through Egypt and the Suez Canal, thereby letting them leave the Red Sea and garnering entry into the Mediterranean Sea to go ahead and full course ahead, move on back home and or to their next theater. But if there has been damage done, to the Ike, it will not go through the Suez Canal. You know why? It will be stationary and people can take photographs, which means if it goes an alternate route, then damage has been sustained. At this time, we have no idea how much. But is the USS Eisenhower and is our government willing to let it run the gauntlet from which it just came through and was attacked? Are they now saying they're going to run the gauntlet back south into open water? That's very interesting, a very interesting conundrum. Well, how about this? What if I told you that I know an American that basically was a trained rocket scientist with a formal background in aerospace R&D and electronics, degreed in aerospace engineering, spent a lot of time in wind tunnels, but whose hands-on experience really got started when he entered the Navy? What if I told you that he trained as a brown shoe? What's that, guys? A naval aviator, flight decks, aircraft carriers. But then, after a brief tenure there, he took the hit to black shoe, black O&I. And what is O&I? O&I is the Office of Naval Intelligence. And what if I told you this man, and I'm going to call him Bob? What if I told you that he was not simply an analyst, but an operator? What if I told you that after he completed the majority of what he was doing within the O&I, Office of Naval Intelligence, and obviously commuting back and forth with other alphabet soup agencies, once he felt satisfied, what if I told you that he then became an expat and is still operational to a certain degree, but lives in China? So would you trust a 25-year veteran of the Office of Naval Intelligence who's been a little bit privy to some satellite imagery that you are not privy, nor am I privy to see? But I did receive a message from him, and it basically was this: don't worry yourself too much, Eric, concerning the sinking of the Ike. But there has been a hit or a couple of hits. We did see fire on the port side and over by the transom. So we know that it did sustain a couple of missile hits. But that's all that he was willing to tell me at this time. Okay. Before I rush the press, and I think it's a valuable story that needs to be out, I needed to have a few more conclusive things. And I think I now have the nails in the coffin. Should something come up contrary, I will be the first one to own it. I'm just, what would I say? Passing this information on because it is more than prescient with what all is happening. And I did want to confer with a couple other sources. And believe it or not, I just both read and listened to the Hindustan Times, which is out of India. Unfortunately, in today's America, RT television, Russian television, Al Jazeera, right? The Arab Network, and the Hindustan Times tell the American people, should they choose to visit their sites and or go to those sources, they tell more truth about our own country than the people within our country. And that is sick. And according to the Hindustan Times, I read the article, I listened to the interview actually from the Houthi commander that conducted the strikes. And it is weird to me. I want to know, I would think that the USS Eisenhower would have been somewhat offshore. The distance, I have no idea. Moreover, I would think they would be taking precautions against this, but apparently it was 2 smaller cruise missiles. I'm trying to read subtitles, listen to an interpreter. And here's what I think is more important. 2 similar missiles were also fired at an American destroyer in the Eisenhower strike group. It was the USS Gravely. Now, this Houthi commander has identified both vessels by name. How does he know this? How does he know which ships he was firing at? How are they able to look down on what we would now call their battlefield? That is very curious to me. But the crazy thing is I guess appropriate measures were taken, and both missiles fired at the USS Gravely were intercepted and or shot down. They did not hit the Gravely. And that is according to our own U.S. CENTCOM, U.S. Central Command. Okay, if U.S. Central Command could acknowledge that 2 were fired upon the USS Gravely, did no damage because we intercepted them, can't they issue some type of similar statement for one of our premier carriers? Oddly silent. Therefore, this episode goes forward. So until next time on the Comfortable in Chaos podcast, I bid you bon voyage, my burgeoning flock.
Until next time, like and subscribe to the Comfort